My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this is the RE podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, which it is, and I'll prove it today. I'll prove it to you. My guests today are Kuljinder, Amy, Jatinder, and Harry, and they are all united by their Sikh faith. But as we will see, this does not make them identical. I saw this lovely group as part of a Sikh panel at Strictly RE in January 20. I wanted to have them on the podcast. So welcome to you all. Do you want to just first go around and kind of introduce who you are and say what you do? So should we start with Kuljinder?
Hi, my name is Kuljinder, and I'm a secondary school RE and citizenship teacher. I'm also the Sikh representative for my local Sacre.
And Amy?
Yeah. So my name's Amy. My full name's actually Amandeep, and I work as a senior program manager at the Faith and Belief Forum, which is an interfaith charity, and I lead the school's work.
Amazing. Jatinder?
Hi everyone, Jatinder Loyal. I work for one of the biggest healthcare regulators in the UK. Legal background, so nothing to do with RE at schools, but sit on Sacre in Hereford and Worcester.
Amazing. And Harry?
Hi, I'm Harry, short for Harman Vinder. Harry is my anglicised name, I'd like to say. And I am a secondary school teacher, although I don't teach RE, I teach English.
Wow. So you can already see kind of the diversity of backgrounds and sort of professions that you do. So that's always really helpful. Do you want to just talk about, first of all, what it means to be a Sikh for you? So we'll start with Amy.
So for me, it's less about the kind of the practice and more about the values and guidance and morals that I get through the Sikh teachings. So it's kind of like a lens through which I understand the world. So I don't go and pray to the Gurdwara, for example, very often, although I listen to Sikh prayers at home. And in terms of some of the kind of the teachings or the practices, that I eat meat, for example, I cut my hair. So I don't follow some of those kind of practices, but I do follow the principles and the values of Sikhi. So living honestly, treating everyone with respect, equality. And I guess the biggest thing for me in terms of what Sikhi means to me is it's about the spiritual connection with God and remembering that rather than anything external. That's actually something that comes from within.
Thank you. Jatinder?
I was going to say something similar, even though we are quite different. I think for me, it's sort of following the principles that have been set by Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the first Sikh Guru. And I think there's a lot about, not doing it for show. So thinking about the principles of helping others, serving others, remembering God, it's not about the flamboyancy of it all. For me, it's quite personal. And I think that's the uniqueness of our faith, which is that it's personal to you as an individual. Everyone is on their own individual journey, and how you practice the faith is individual to you as well. I come from a mixed family, should we say. There's baptized Sikhs, there's people that don't believe at all, and there's people that are not baptized. But we all practice the faith in our own way. I don't impose what I believe on people that are not baptized as Sikhs, and vice versa. So for me, it's more about, the applying the principles and the values in day-to-day life.
And Jatinder, would you see those values as the same as Amy in terms of, equality and service? Are they the sort of similar kind of values that you bring out, or is there sort of other ones that you'd add to that?
Well, I think those are the core values, and like I said, Guru Nanak Dev Ji gave us those core values of remembering God in everything that we do, to earn an honest living, and then to share what we have with others. And how you do that is really individual to you. Like sometimes I think, okay, helping others or serving others, it's through langar at the Gurdwara, but it doesn't have to be. Just the other day I dropped a bag of potatoes off at the Salvation Army street kitchen. That for me was serving. And, so there's different ways. You've got the label, but then how you actually do something underneath is quite different.
Thank you. Harry?
Yeah, I think very, very similar to what's been said already. I mean, I come from a very sort of religious family. So growing up, fair bit of pressure. But again, it wasn't pressure that was put upon me. It was pressure I put upon myself because of, the family that I have. But then as I've grown up, again, very similar. Me and my family will have the same ideals, but we look at it differently. So, for example, my brothers have got haircuts, but I've kept my hair, but I also trim my beard, but my dad doesn't do either. He's never cut any of his hair ever. So it's again, very mixed household. But Sikhi to me means very much responsibility. What I mean by that is sort of, very similar to what Jatinder said about the key principles about, earning an honest living, sharing what you've got and remembering God at all times. But it's that responsibility in my opinion, to just bring a bit of goodness into the world. There's so much bad that is a nice way for us to say, actually, these very simple principles can actually, if everyone were to do them, would make the world a better place, because they're very simple things. So for me, it's all about responsibility and actually trying to live the way my gurus have taught me.
Thank you, Harry. And Kujinder?
And just to reiterate what everyone said, really. So I've talked about, as a Sikh, you're always learning, and selfless service, seva, and equality is really important to all of us and the Sikh religion in general. And yeah, I do agree with everyone. It's living by, we live by the same ideals, but how we interpret it is, and how we live by them is different.
And it's so interesting to see that connection that ties you together within your Sikh identity, but the way that you express it or maybe approach it, or what you focus on, or what is your priority kind of is individual to you. And it's lovely to have a faith that allows that. One of the misconceptions I think maybe people have, maybe within the RE community, but certainly outside, is that there is a shared cultural background and that you all come from the same place and you practice Sikhi in the same way. So if we could maybe just focus on that in terms of what your personal cultural background is and how that impacts how you practice your faith. So we'll start with Jatinder.
I think that's a really interesting question, because it's something that I think I struggle with, and I guess a lot of people struggle with, because that cultural background, what is it? Is it the box that I'm ticking on a census form? Am I British Indian? Am I Indian British? Am I Indian? And it's really, really interesting because, if I look back, my grandparents traveled from India over to Kenya, from Kenya to the UK. So I'm thinking, okay, is my cultural background, is it Indian? Is it African? Or is it British? In the sense that I'm born and bred in the UK, my cultural background, I feel, is British, because I'm born in the UK, but at the same time, I've inherited and celebrate Indian culture and African culture as well. And it's really, really interesting, because then when you say, how does that, interplay with how we practice our faith? I think one thing that's really interesting for me is dialect and language. One thing that's universal for us as Sikhs is Guru Granth Sahib Ji. It's written in the Gurmukhi script. But yeah, at home, I'll often hear, African Swahili words thrown in, and I'm like, okay, who's just said that? And then when you're looking at, sort of the Indian side of things, it's again thinking about, okay, not the cliche, but things like birth, marriages, funerals. What's the Sikh side of things, and what's the cultural side of things? We've seen on Channel 4, I don't know whether listeners will have seen it, probably have, they talk about the big fat weddings, the big fat Greek wedding, the big fat Indian wedding. And really for me, it's those sort of misconceptions that exist that, if we're thinking about the concept of marriage, in Sikh it's called the Anand Karaj. It's very different then to what we see in terms of a Punjabi wedding. But at the same time, I've got friends and cousins that got married in Kenya, and even though they're from a Punjabi heritage, they did things slightly different as well. So there's lots of different things, and I think it's really, really important that when teachers are speaking about the Sikh faith, that we don't say that, it's Punjabi, it's an Indian tradition that's followed, because it's so diverse. And I've got friends that are actually white Sikhs that are born in, the States, and for them, their cultural background is white, that's their heritage, but they're actually practicing the Sikh faith. So I think there's a difference that has to be cleared up sometimes. And I think that's when, when people say, oh, I went to a Sikh wedding, I'm thinking, did you really go to a Sikh wedding? But yeah.
But actually, I think something like a festival or a celebration or a rite of passage is kind of a good way into showing cultural diversity of how Sikh is practiced.
Definitely.
Because you can go, look, actually in this country, this is how they do the Sikh wedding, and in this country, and can you see the differences and what are the similarities? And let's go back to the holy text. It's quite a tangible way, I think, to celebrate diversity. If you look at something like the food or the clothing or even the language, as you say. You use the word Gurmukhi. Can you just clarify exactly what that is in case it's a word that's new to people?
Yeah, so Gurmukhi is the language or the dialect that's given to us Sikhs. So something that I've always been keen to sort of explore is what have the 10 Sikh gurus given to us. Yeah, Guru Nanak Dev Ji founded we call them the founder of the Sikh faith, but then other successive gurus gave us something tangible to work with, and it was the second Guru, Guru Angad Dev Ji, that gave us the Gurmukhi script. Guru Nanak Dev Ji started it, but then it was, should we say, then you could say codified by Guru Angad Dev Ji. And all of the Guru Granth Sahib then is actually written in Gurumukhi script. And I think those that are really interested in, sort of exploring religious text will really sort of be fascinated by how, writings of the Sikh gurus, but also other saints and scholars from different parts of India. So there, there could be, Sanskrit, it could be Nepalese, it could be, from somewhere down in the south of India. It's their language, but it's been written in Gurumukhi script. So it's just really interesting how that concept works. So Gurumukhi is what the script is, how it's written. But we speak, like I said, the dialect that we speak at home is Punjabi. But like I said, going back to my cultural heritage, someone throws an African word in every now and then, and I'm thinking, okay, where am I?
Yeah.
Where am I? I talk to kids. I always say that, do you call it a cob or a bap or a bomb? So it's very similar.
100%. So Harry,
I mean, very similar to Jatinder in the sense of my dad was born in Kenya. So again, my family left India during the partition time, went to Kenya, and then made their way to Britain. But for me, very much see myself as British. I was born here. My mum was born here. Okay, my dad was born in Kenya. So again, there's that little bit of what actually is my culture, but I've always felt that affinity to Punjabi culture because that's actually where my roots are. But it can be quite tricky trying to, especially growing up. So I grew up in Leeds. There wasn't a lot of Sikhs like in my sort of age range that I went to school with. So it was quite hard for me from an identity perspective to kind of feel comfortable. I wanted to be proud of being Punjabi. I also wanted to be proud to be Sikh, but I also wanted to be proud to be British. And a lot of the values kind of clash a little bit, So for me, one of the struggles I personally had was whether or not I wanted to cut my hair. Obviously, I had my older brothers. I looked up to them massively. They were quite a lot older than me. And my dad was more of an authority figure. I was more scared of him than anything. So if I needed to speak to anyone, I'd go straight to my brothers. So they were kind of a bit of an influence on me. But again, my dad spent a lot of time teaching me about the history of Sikhi. And then the more I learned, the more I kind of weaned away from wanting to cut my hair. So I'm kind of glad about all that, to be fair. It still is a bit of a struggle. I mean, balancing, my Sikhi with being British. There's certain things that I do that I shouldn't do. For example, I trim my beard. I like going to the pub with my friends. Again, very anti-Sikhi, but a very British thing to go to the pub or have fish and chips on a Friday night. Like I love those things. And I feel like I've now found a bit of a balance where everything kind of is perfect. And just to piggyback off what Jatinder said, when I first got married, I used to use words which I didn't realize were Swahili until I got married, because then my wife and my wife's family are looking at me like, that's not a word. That's not. And in my whole life, I've been using these words thinking, oh yeah, that's just what it is. But it wasn't at all.
I'm really interested in your relationship with your hair. And I think it's so interesting. As I was listening to you speak, I kind of felt like, it feels like Harry's achieved that middle way, where you have respected all of those identities and all of those parts of who make up you to kind of together. And I think, and as Jatinder was saying earlier, that this is about selfless service. As long as you buy around when you're at the pub, that, which I hope you do.
Yeah,
actually, how you reflect your values or how they play out in your life is going to be individual, but it's the values that sit behind them that seemed important. I think, that's great.
So my granddad's from Malaysia and my parents are from India. So again, born British. So again, trying to find the balance between British culture and Indian culture. But when we were younger, when we were filling out any forms, there was not really an option. It was just white. Now it's got British Indian. So I feel like we've made some progress there. But I think because our religion started in India, we've obviously got a lot of holy sites in India. So for example, the Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib. But then you also got holy sites in Pakistan, because that's where Guru Nanak was born. So I feel like then there's Punjab in Pakistan, Punjab in India. So again, there's Punjabi culture for Sikhs and there's Punjabi culture for Muslims in Pakistan as well. So it's quite a crossover, but I'd probably say cultural background, yes, I'm Indian. But yes, I was born here, so I'd say I'm British too. I did grow up not cutting my hair, but when I got married, I did cut my hair. So again, because in the olden days, your long hair would distinguish you from a Hindu or Muslim. And it's quite a raw topic because some Sikh gurus and other Sikhs were tortured. And one of the ideas was to remove the hair. So for some people, it's still quite a sensitive topic.
Can you explain to me, or to us, to the listeners, the significance of not cutting your hair? Why has that become? So did it start by being something you did for God to show respect for creation, or did it come as a way of identifying yourself from other groups?
Probably a bit of both. So the idea of growing your hair is keeping everything natural, because everything's a gift from God, and also the idea of spiritual energy in your hair, and again, identifying yourself from Muslims and Hindus in India.
It's really fascinating, just because both you and actually, Amy, you said earlier that you cut your hair, and so this seems to be kind of an interesting tension between sort of culture, religion, cultural heritage. Sort of the interplay between all of those things seems to kind of play out in how you choose to wear your hair, and actually sometimes remembering the history behind it and the significance of it can help you decide what is the right thing for you in that moment. Amy, lastly for you.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what others have said, actually, in terms of the kind of the connection with Indian heritage. I grew up in a very Punjabi family. When I say Punjabi family, I mean, so they were culturally Punjabi in the sense that, it was all about the music, but also heavily around kind of the partying side of it, so, alcohol, meat, all of those things, like from the heritage that I have in terms of the family connections with Punjab, it's very much there, which is so, it's contradictory to Sikh values and Sikh, way of growing up. So I struggled with that a lot as a kid, because it was like, but why, we can't eat meat before we go to the Gurdwara to pray, but we can come home and then eat meat afterwards. It was this sort of thing of like, but how does that work? So there was a lot of questioning, I think, that went on for me growing up. And then, of course, the whole Britishness as well. So I was born in Britain, so I do feel British as well. And there was a lot of, I think, sort of tension again growing up, wanting to belong and fit in as British, but then having this whole other world at home and with my family that I kept very, very separate actually when I was at school, because similar to Harry, I grew up in a place in a small town where there weren't very many. I mean, the Sikh community was tiny in that town growing up. So it was like people just didn't really understand. So I kind of kept everything very separate growing up. And I do think that then affects things like feelings of belonging or wanting to belong. But then adding the kind of the Sikh, the Sikh teachings as well, it was kind of like these three different things that I was trying to kind of negate or kind of negotiate, I guess, and like which one do I feel I belong to, or which I was connected to. But it wasn't, I guess I had to go through those stages and ages. And it was when I got older that actually I realized I connect to all three, just finding what felt right for me across all three. And kind of reconciling with some of those differences. But one of the big differences actually that I still struggle with is the equality of women. That's something that is, I fully believe in, and I really, is part of really sort of core Sikh teaching is about equality. And culturally within Punjabi community, men and women, do go into those traditional roles, or the expectations are very different of men and women. And that's been a real struggle. And those conversations like with elders, especially growing up, it was like, well, no, that's just how it is. But but that's what we're taught very differently within strict Sikh values. And it's but this is just what is expected. So that's still a conversation that's ongoing.
And thank you, Amy. It's something I want to kind of chat to you all about in terms of the sort of interplay of religion and culture when we're looking at the role of men and women. But there's just one question I want to ask you, and maybe Harry might want to say something as about choosing an anglicized version of your name. Is that something you did sort of earlier and then it just became synonymous with your identity and you've kept it? Or and what was your reasons for wanting to do that? Was it, again, as you were saying, to sort of help you to fit in and sort of remove that otherness of that feeling sometimes that people are given if they're a bit different?
Yeah, definitely for me. And I was talking about this the other day with colleagues at work, actually, because it's still something I struggle with, because I feel like I can't, I don't want to give up either. So very often I use both Amandeep and Amy. But I was young. It was when I left school and started college. It was like, okay, an opportunity for, a slightly new identity, or, really who I am. So I started using the name Amy, and then so my whole family call me Amandeep. actually. They know that I'm called Amy at work and, professionally or with friends and all the rest of it. And then professionally at work, I just was always using Amy. Now I do feel like I connect to both, and it is part of that identity struggle. So I guess it is still going on, even though, I feel connected to all three, like sort of being British, being Punjabi, but also being Sikh. But yeah, it's definitely something that actually I want to use both of them, or I want to make sure, in some areas I'm like, no, I want to use Amandeep. And people are like, oh, we didn't know that was your name. So it still feels like, I have to explain some of that. But absolutely, that's absolutely where it came from for me.
Yeah. I think there is a natural thing by when you're sort of, nearing your 20s, sort of late teens, early 20s, where you do want to establish yourself as a identity away from your family. And actually with you had that kind of extra layer as well of finding a name that allowed you to kind of feel that you could start this new identity and sort of, feel a bit more connected to other people away from your family. So I think it's really interesting. Harry, have you had a sort of similar journey?
Mine's a little bit of a weird one, to be honest. I don't ever remember the first time I was called Harry. I've been Harry as long as I can remember. I think a lot of my situation stemmed from teachers being unable to say my name.
Yeah.
But also a little bit of, and I will say it's jealousy. It's jealousy because my family have really cool names that all mean something. And then when it came to my name, it basically was just a couple of different names thrown together. And it doesn't really actually mean anything. Like if I consider my brother's name, which means like conqueror of the world, and then mine just hasn't got a meaning, I just felt a bit, I think they've done me a little bit dirty here.
Yeah.
I mean, there was that. And then when the register came up and then the teachers were just like trying to say it, it's not even a hard name to say, to be honest. It's just Harman Vinder. You can spell it out phonetically, but they never could say it. And what I used to do, because I was so embarrassed that teachers couldn't say my name, was I'd put my hand up. I'd remember exactly where I was in the register, put my hand up and say, call me Harry.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more of, I guess, a reaction. But then same again, like my mom, my dad, my brothers, my cousins, they all call me Harry. I very rarely am I called by my full name. And to be honest, I do regret it a little bit. I wish I kind of was a bit stronger with my name because, you look at me and I'm not a Harry. Let's be honest, I'm not.
Yeah.
My name is Harman Binder. But yeah, it was just a bit of a weird one. I guess Harry just kind of stuck, and then I've not really thought about it too much since. I just kind of on, to be honest.
Yeah. I think I feel like this is the moment Amy and Harry are going to embrace their chosen names. This is the moment, isn't it? So I think it's really interesting to think about your relationship with your name and your hair and sort of the impact it has. Harry, we'll stay with you. And actually, Amy mentioned the role of men and women and tied up with that kind of belief in inequality. But that sometimes clashes with kind of cultural heritage. So how, for you, has sort of religion and culture interacted in terms of the role of men and women?
Well, I mean, I would say I grew up in a more traditional household in the sense of, dad would fix everything, mum would do the cooking and cleaning, and there was very rarely a crossover. I feel like dad cooked for me maybe once, and I'm pretty sure that's because my mum was in India, so he didn't really have a choice. He did have to look after me, unfortunately for him. But I would say from generation to generation, I would say it's changing, to be fair. Like, in my marriage, my mum always made sure I was very domesticated. I did my own washing, laundry, etc. So, like, it's not so much that we have a household now, which is I fix everything and my wife does the dishes and the cleaning and the cooking. She does do all the cooking, guarantee that I'm not a very good chef. But in terms of household chores, it's not as kind of traditional as it used to be. I think culturally with Punjabis, it is very much, at home, the mums would do all the cooking, to be fair, and the cleaning. They do quite a lot. They're basically superheroes, in my opinion, Punjabi mums, because they just do so much. And I consider my mum, for example, she did all that cooking, cleaning. She had 3 boys and she was at uni at the same time at one point. So I don't think a Punjabi man could do that, like, at all. I mean, we just about get through uni as it is, and we've not got the stress of children and running a household. So I think, I come from, like I said, a very traditional household where my mum is basically a superhuman. And seeing my mum have to do that makes me want to kind of pull my weight a little bit more because it's not really fair. Yeah,
I think you're selling yourself short. I think you're a superhero underneath there.
I think But yeah, no. So I try and take the load off a little bit. I do as much as I can in the house. So yeah, I would say I'd say not even just from a Sikh perspective. I'd say from like a modern perspective. Like we're not in a situation now where women are staying at home full time and the men are working, because we're in a situation where you can't really live off one wage anymore unless you're earning a hell of a lot of money. So yeah, I would say there's definitely a movement to more equality within the household, in my opinion.
Gurjinder, how about you?
Yeah, so like our religion does teach equality, but I grew up, it was quite traditional, but my dad would do the washing up, my mum would do the cooking, my dad would go shopping. So the household chores was sort of divided. Then obviously me and my sister would do the chores, whereas my brother didn't. So again, I don't know whether because he was the youngest or whether because he was a boy. We don't know. Me and my sister were like, it's not fair, he hasn't got a chore to do. So our religion does teach equality. But one thing I would say is, men and women are both allowed to read the Guru Granth Sahib in the Gurdwara. But like we're talking about, the culture is still, some places is still very stereotypical. I just want to mention something about when babies are born. Culturally, it's when a girl is born, it's frowned upon and it's not really celebrated, and they don't give out any Indian sweets. This was before, so now people might give out like cupcakes and things. There was something called the Pink Laddu Project, and they basically were saying you should celebrate whether it's a girl or a boy being born, because usually when a boy is born, you give out laddus, Indian sweets, and when a girl is born, nothing's given out. So I found out about the Pink Laddu Project after I had my daughter, but she's going to be 17 soon. So looking back, I wish I had given out some Indian sweets when she was born. So again, culturally, it's Asian thing, Indian thing. Even though our religion does teach equality, culturally, sometimes that's not the case.
So 2 questions. One, are there gurdwaras around the world that are in maybe a very patriarchal culture where they don't allow women to read the Guru Granth Sahib?
I'd probably say maybe, I think in the Golden Temple.
Okay.
Not sure anywhere else, because I know other places the Sikh women can lead prayer. So like in America, for example. But I still see when I watch the Golden Temple on TV, it's still very male dominated. So I would say it's probably the patriarchal culture.
And then is it the Pink Loaded Project?
Laddu, Pink Laddu Project.
Laddu, how do you spell that?
Ladoo.
Laddu. Okay, because I know people are going to want to Google that, so I'll put a link to the show notes to that. Jatinder?
I think for me, this is where I struggle. I really, 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 really struggle. Not personally, but just with the concept of what we've been taught and what actually happens in practice. Because I think, like with Harry and Amy, Kuljinder, I think all of us, from something that you said at the beginning, that we've all gone through a journey, so to speak, in terms of who we are and what we are and where we are now. And I think for me, I went on a personal journey because, I was bullied at school for having hair. I cut my hair growing up as a teenager. But then I think in my 20s, I became, I wouldn't say like a pretend PhD student, because, I'd love to have DPhil after my name. Who wouldn't? But just sort of like I sort of delved more into what was actually going on, and was this something that I wanted to be part of? Did I want to be a Sikh? Not just the fact that I was born into a Sikh family and I thought that, I can take the good, bad and the ugly with it, or, leave the bits that I don't like. But what did my faith mean to me? And I think for me, it was then that I started to sort of read more about it. Okay, what was not just what's written in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, because people sometimes say, okay, is Guru Granth Sahib Ji, is it a doctrine? Is it an operation manual? Is it, what is it? And for me, it's a plethora of so many different things. You can take it as a friend, you could take it as a guide, you could take it as teachings. There's so many ways that you apply each verse, each line, each word of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. But it was how the gurus then lived their lives. And sometimes I think that, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, first guru, they celebrated women in so many different ways that I thought, wow, this is really, really good. Their own sister, they revered, their sister, though Guru Nanak Dev Ji's sister Bibi Nanki Ji, as though they were God or a personification of God. It was a very, you sort of want to be the sort of, the CCTV footage at the time, or the camera in the room, just to see what that relationship was like. And because of how women were treated, and if you think about it, that, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, something that Kuljinder said as well, they were born in what is now Punjab, Pakistan. But they traveled across India, across the subcontinent to Nepal, to Tibet. And recently, I think the last 10, 15 years, they found that they've even traveled west towards Istanbul, that they've gone that far. And I think when you look at how society was, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, women were treated very, very differently to how they're treated now. So what they did through their engagement with people, their discussions, and then their teachings, their shabads, it was about giving women that equal footing. Something that always stood out to me was in Asa Diwar, the morning prayers that we sing sometimes. There's something that comes through which celebrates women that, Banda Jamia, that we're born from a woman. Banda Nimia, so why do we frown upon that woman that we're born from? Kings are born from that woman. I won't read the whole verse, but, they celebrated women in a very, very different way. And then when you look at how other successive gurus again celebrated women, through Guru Amar Das Ji and Guru Angad Dev Ji, Langar was celebrated or established as a sort of formal setting by Mata Kivi. There's still Langar in Punjab that runs under her name. Mata Kivi still has a massive sort of.
Was that Guru Nanak's sister?
No, Mata
wife,
Kivi
or...
was later on.
Later. Okay.
And then you look at sort of, again, successive gurus and how women have played a role in that sort of, their sort of lives, and I was always sort of fascinated by that, going through history, thinking that, okay, yeah, even reading stories about how the fifth Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji, they were so popular in their time because of the fact that the city of Amritsar had been established. It wasn't the Golden Temple then, because the gold was, came later on, but Harmandir Sahib, as it is, came about, and how their wife Mata Gangaji was celebrated as a woman. They greeted all the congregation before Guru Arjan Dev Ji did. So again, the role of women was very, very different. And then again, you see in Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the 10th Guru, how Mata Sahib Kaur celebrated the concept of Amrit and became part of that initiation ceremony. So women have sort of played a really important part in Sikh history. But something that Kuljinder said that then where I struggle is, why is it then that, the 5 ducats that we call them, so you've got, the 5 core places of, the Sikh faith, and they're not just in Punjab, you've got them in South India, Bihar. Why is it that women don't play a forefront role in carrying out service? Why is it that Harmandir Sahib, we call it the Golden Temple, why is it that women don't do Kirtan there? Why is it that, at the other 4 takats, well, the 5 takats, because Harmandir Sahib isn't a takat, but Akal Takat, Damdama Sahib, Patna Sahib, Hajur Sahib, that women are not seen in the same way as the gurus did? And I think it's something that I really, really struggle with, because it's then that, okay, what is the religion teaching, and what is it that we've adopted as culture, where women have always been oppressed through not just Punjabi culture, but also, all cultures. We look at British culture as well. Sometimes I think, and I think I said it when we were at the Strictly RE session as well, that I love the fact that I want to plot what was happening at the time of the Sikh gurus. And you're looking at around the same time, Henry VIII was chopping his wife's heads off. And you're thinking that, that women were treated very, very differently. Okay, they didn't bear sons for him, so all of a sudden it was like, yeah, thank you, goodbye, I've had enough of you, move on to the next one, sort of thing. But women were oppressed, and I think it's really interesting, and like I said, it's a massive topic for me, just in terms of wanting to understand why, what switched the button, or what flipped the switch from what the 10 gurus have taught us and how they celebrated women to what we actually do and have seen since. That, what sort of caused that difference? Where did this male dominance come from? Because I think the fact that we see male dominance in places of worship, I think it then translates down to how we then as males, and I'm not saying that Harry's in the same boat as I am, but you start seeing then that, okay, yeah, that is a male role. Only men can do that, because you see it in that place where you go to sort of seek sanctuary, where you go to see, where to pray, to sit as a congregation, and all of a sudden, women are not there. And you're thinking, oh, that must be the norm then. And then when it comes to family life, you think, oh, it's just the same as well. You don't question it, or you don't challenge it. And I think that's where it becomes really, really interesting in terms of just understanding that role of women. And there are thousands of women. I'm blessed to be in the company of 3 women today that, that are professionals, have moved on, are doing things for themselves. But again, that's something that the gurus wanted. They wanted women to stand out for the right reasons. Whereas, like I said, culturally, it's quite different, and goes back to that, something that Kuljinder said as well. That even girls, it was really interesting. Like, girls in our family weren't allowed to cut their hair, but the boys were. It was fine for boys to cut their hair, but the girls weren't. No, you as a girl had to have long hair. I've got 4 cousins in London, and if they ever even thought about cutting their hair, guaranteed our family would have been in uproar. Yeah, boys could do whatever they wanted, short back and side. Even I did at a point that, going to the barbers, yet my own sister wasn't allowed to cut her hair. And I think there's a real important discussion that has to happen. And I don't think there's a fix for it, but I think it's having the confidence to have those open discussions and challenge why are things happening in the way that they are.
And I think it's not even a Sikhi thing. I think if you look at how Muhammad treated women and spoke about women, how Jesus treated women and spoke about women, if you have a look at the heritage of Hindu Dharma, women are always celebrated, created equally. And then culturally or nationalism or something happens that just slightly warps it. And so Malala Yousafzai will say she came to the UK, wore jeans. Everyone slated her for it.
Yeah.
Her brothers came over to the UK, wore jeans. No one noticed. And so I think you've always got that interplay between culture and religion, even though, if people were being true to the religion, women are always celebrated within all, I don't know a single religion where they're not. I know the way it's practiced isn't, but if you go back to the core teachings. Amy, let's bring you in. What sort of thoughts do you have on this topic?
I mean, absolutely agreement with what everybody's been saying, to be honest. And just to pick up on a couple of points, I think, there are some areas where things have become more progressive and more equal. And just connecting with what Kuljinder was saying about the celebration of girls, or the lack of celebration of girls when they're born. I was the second daughter for my parents, and my dad, he celebrated my older sister's birth. And then when I was born, the reaction from some of the elders was, oh no, not another girl, and it was quite negative. And my dad was always very proud to say that, no, I told them, I don't care what you're saying. I've had another child, we've been blessed. And actually he celebrated my birth as well. And then when it came to my own time as well, again, when I had my eldest, Pink Laddu wasn't a thing then. And I absolutely celebrated it as soon as I found out. I was like, what a great idea. But I had 2 daughters and then a son. And actually something that my husband and I said when each of the kids were born, boy or girl, we actually celebrated each of their births in the same way. They all had blessings at the temple. We gave sweets to anybody that came and visited. So it was chocolate boxes as opposed to sort of pink laddu. But it was celebrated. All 3 of them were celebrated in the same sort of way. We tried to kind of do that, even though a lot of people in the family were like, "Oh, you're giving out sweets," and there was still some of that reaction. And we did have a couple of people who, again, similar to my own parents' experience, commented when I had a second daughter. It's still there, but I think it's really important that these things are challenged, whether it be through a cause like the Pink Laddu, which I think, is raising awareness about the value of boys and girls, within cultures and within, especially within the kind of Indian cultures. But I think it's really important to do that. And I think the only other thing I would say is also, I was grateful that my parents raised. So I'm one of 4 kids. There's 2 girls and then 2 younger brothers. And actually, for my parents, education was really key, whether for boys and girls. And I think that's something I've seen from my experience from family members that I know within other Sikh families and other Punjabi families. That is something that I'm seeing as being kind of a way of showing equality, is that actually it's important for boys and girls, to be educated, to, really think about their careers and progress in that sense. So I think things have progressed in some areas, which is great. It's just continuing to tell that story and continuing to that. But I think, when it comes to kind of some of the household roles and chores and things like that, I think more can be done. Definitely.
I think for all of us, I've got 2 sons and I've had similar things like, oh, are you disappointed you didn't have a daughter? No, I've got 2 wonderful children, and, there's no guarantee that gender will stay as they grow up. It's just such a strange binary or sort of strange way to demark human beings is, things like that. So I think that's really interesting. I want to sort of focus a little bit now on how we teach Sikhi in the classroom. So a lot of people listening to this will be RE teachers, and we're always really keen to teach Sikhi in the most authentic way while celebrating that diversity. So what I'm interested in is, what would you like us to teach the young people that are in our classroom? So let's start with Gurjinder.
I've got three things. First of all, not all Sikhs have long hair. Back to hair, topic of hair.
Yeah.
But obviously, I've mentioned earlier, traditionally, long hair did distinguish Sikhs from Hindus or Muslims in India. Not all Sikhs also wear a kara. A majority do. But obviously, like my sister and my daughter, for example, they have allergic reactions. So I think we have to get them a silver one.
Yeah.
And the other misconception, which I assumed that when I was on the Sikhi panel, that teachers knew about the difference between initiated Sikhs and non-initiated Sikhs. But I feel like some people just assume if you're wearing all the 5Ks, you're a Sikh. So that's one thing.
I think I think they think all Sikhs wear all 5Ks. And, that I think is probably the biggest misconception. Yeah.
Yeah. And also the concept, the idea of the Kirpan, just need to get across it's actually a religious symbol, and it represents that Sikhs will fight for justice or defend the oppressed.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they just see it as a weapon.
Yeah. No, I think that is really helpful. And it's, I think sometimes we take things literally and we don't explore the kind of symbolic sort of meaning behind things. That's really, really important. So who are we going to next? Amy.
I think for me, because when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking back to when I learned about Sikhi or Sikhism, when I was at school, and I didn't what I was hearing at all when the 1 week of the year that it was taught. I was sitting there thinking, that's not how I do it, or recognize that, and that then threw in all sorts of extra doubt about my own identity with that confusion. I think for me, one of the biggest things when I started really investigating and trying to understand about Sikhi myself was about the oneness of God, that there is one God. I think that's sort of a perception in terms of the belief that actually it's more. So Ikonkar is very much more about God is in everything, and actually it's not this necessarily thing or creation or being. That being that's out there is actually living in every living creature, including every person that you meet, and that's where that sense of understanding of equality and respect comes from. Actually, we are all part of the same world, the same spirituality, that we have that God in us, and also that connects to the environment as well, actually respecting God's creation, because every living plant, every animal is has God within them as well. So yeah, that for me was like a real mind-blowing moment when I realized that actually it's Ikonkar is the oneness of God with everything, as opposed to I believe in one God. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing I'd want to put across.
And that's almost a translation thing, isn't it? It's a kind of like a sort of Christianization of a translation. So Ikonkar, we quite often translate as there is one God, where actually it's much more closer to maybe Hindu concept of the divine, little bit of like the oneness of Allah, the sort of Islam, because that's the kind of context in which Sikhi kind of developed. And I think we've kind of put that kind of white Christian lens on that belief system to make it more familiar or palatable. Or not even that. I think it's just that we didn't have any concept of anything outside of that when we're doing those translations. I think that's one, a really important distinction to make, but also really powerful learning when you look at the influence of that belief. How are we going to? I'm just gonna. Yeah. So, Jatinder.
Yeah, I think I would do it the other way around. Sort of like, what would we not want you to teach? Sort of like, rather than what would you want? What would we want teachers to be teaching? I think firstly, we've already discussed some of the stuff anyway, that don't mix Punjabi culture with the Sikh faith. The two are very, very different. And I think that's where a lot of schools and kids then really get confused, because they sort of see things or hear things and it's like, yeah, this is what Sikhs do, which is very, very different. And I think it's really important, again, going back to the teachers in the room, especially Gurjinder being the RE teacher, that the Sikh faith isn't really, the predominant religion within the RE syllabus. So the time that it's given is quite limited. But I think it has to, the time that is, afforded to the Sikh faith, it has to be as genuine and, authentic as possible. it's about making sure that there isn't sort of that room for misconception. So again, thinking about, making sure that the children understand that difference between, infants, me, Jatinder, being born into a Sikh faith, then practicing the faith, and then becoming an initiated Sikh through, and what that concept of Khalsa means as well. Something that you picked on there as well, Louisa, just thinking again that, that some kids I've heard, and even teachers say as well, that, people didn't like what was happening in India at the time, that, they didn't like, the Muslim faith, or they didn't like, the Hindu faith, and that's why, Sikhs came about. I disagree. It wasn't about that people didn't like what was taught, because Guru Nanak Dev Ji has always said that, that we're human before anything else. But also, if you are born into a Sikh family, learn to be a good Sikh. If you're born into a Christian family, learn to be a good Christian. If you're born into a Hindu or Muslim family, learn to be a good Hindu Muslim. And the same, for the other religions. Whatever you're born into, learn to be good at that, excel in that space. And I think it's, going back to, not to make a mockery of it, but the names. Something that really, really annoys me sometimes is how things are pronounced. Teachers are educated, they're university graduates, yet they struggle with pronunciation. And I'm thinking they're like, sometimes, as Harry said, 3 syllables, and then when you hear sort of like someone say to you, "Are you wearing the Kirpan?" I'm like, what's a Kirpan? Right. Then it's like, "Oh, are you wearing the Kara?" I'm like, what's a Kara? Kara is like my next door neighbor. She's there. It's that sort of thing that, it's just making sure that we just have, like I said, it's being authentic and being respectful as well. I think it's really important. I grew up in a Catholic school from the age of 3 to 18, and I probably had more respect for the Catholic side of Christianity because of my own upbringing, in terms of, making sure I didn't say things the wrong way, had respect for what was going on, not taking the mick out of how many people, how people told to say, 10 Hail Marys after confession, that sort of thing. That, there is something there that I think teachers have got a massive role to play to ensure that not just that kids are educated, but they're in a position to celebrate that diversity that religion brings. And again, I think it's just some of the misconceptions. Like I said, it's really hard, like I said, for RE teachers within the time that they've got to sort of have those discussions around, okay, what does it mean to be a Sikh? What does it mean to be an initiated Sikh? The discussions around eating meat and drinking alcohol, who do they apply to? Who do they not apply to? The concepts of, again, sort of women in the faith and all of those, they're too big a topic to give them justice within the time that's afforded. So I think try and be as basic as you can. Sometimes just going back to the core beliefs, just teach those in the right way, and it'll just make a massive difference. And it'll just help kids understand as well that, okay, there is something different out there, but we've got enough now to move forward with it. And if we want to know more, we can do A-level RE, we can go and do RE at university. So I think it's just planting the seeds, but planting the seeds in the right way. Make sure the bud's downward facing so something grows out rather than the root upwards.
It's interesting when I'm doing my lessons on Sikhi. So I've got a unit that focuses on how equality is expressed in different elements of Sikh faith. I put the pronunciation, like the phonetic pronunciation of words, because I was hearing teachers go sewer. I was like, sewer, why are they talking about sewers? And I was like, oh, Seva, okay. So, things like that, because I just think that's really helpful. One thing that's interesting, and this is to do with language and pronunciation. So I tend to use Sikhi and Sikh. You guys interchangeably use Sikh, Sikhism, Sikhi and Sikh. From my understanding, you tell me if I'm wrong, so Sikh comes from Punjabi word Sikhna, which is to learn, and therefore Sikhi is, are you happy that that's more authentic? Or is it better just to use a word that you think other people are going to understand?
Okay. I think it's a real challenge because, again, there'll be people on this call or that will be listening to this afterwards that will know the esteemed, and I mentioned her at the panel, the conference as well, Becky David from Worcester University. She passed away, last year, the year before. But she did a whole project on the colonialization of faith. And it's not just, everything's become an ism.
Yeah.
And Sikhism isn't an ism, it's a way of life.
Yeah.
So we're born as Sikhs and we practice Sikhi.
Yeah.
Which is, we don't practice Sikhism, we practice Sikhi.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's going to be one of those things that we'll just have to, time will just catch up. if you think about it, a lot of school texts still refer to Sikhism.
Yeah.
Going back to what Kuljinda and I were saying about tick boxes on census forms, it still says Sikhism. What's your faith? It doesn't say Sikh or Sikhi, it says Sikhism. So again, it's just that, until the decolonization of faith, not just the Sikh faith, but of all faiths happens, that, until labels are started to sort of come back to their true form, that there are going to be those sort of worries. So I think, yeah, because kids will be like, oh, but I Googled Sikhi and nothing came up. But if I Googled Sikhism, I had a whole load of, that sort of thing. So I think it's that sort of thing. We have to find that balance that, when we're talking about it in the true sense, we talk about, people of the Sikh faith that practice Sikhi. But in terms of education, we have to appreciate that, the ism has attached itself and it's going to take time for it to unattach.
On the census, if you're a humanist, you had to choose other religion first and then humanism. So no humanist is going to ever go into the other religion box to find humanism. So there's only 10,000 humanists in the country that actually found that box to tick it, and everybody else had to just put non-religious. So there's huge problems in the census in terms of language, I think, and identifying and categorizing people. Harry, anything you would like us to teach our children about Sikhi?
I think a lot of the misconceptions have been kind of picked out already, to be fair. And I think I agree with Jatinder in the sense of there isn't enough time.
Yeah.
In the sense of you have like a half term to go through a whole religion, which has so much depth of history, so much depth of, everything in terms of principles and beliefs. And it's almost impossible to get through it in the time. For me, I think it's really important that teachers understand the history of Sikhs. And what I mean by history of Sikhs is how Sikhs have ended up in the position that they've ended up, and why they're such a resilient community. I feel like a lot of the time it's a little bit romanticized. Sikhi can be romanticized by the curriculum, by the textbooks, and say, look at all these fantastic things we do. We preach equality and we have seva and we have free food and all this kind of stuff. But actually, there's no discussion about the fact that Sikhs were on the brink of extinction at one point, or that they were hiding jungles just to survive, or that there were prices on their heads by numerous Mughal emperors in the 1700s. Zakaria Khan, Mir Manu, they were paying people large amounts of sums to bring a Sikh head to them. That's not a position that, we've, as a community, I would say we have kind of managed to make ourselves comfortable wherever we are, whether that's in England, whether that's in Kenya, whether that's in Canada, US, United States, India, wherever. But I think that stems from resilience. And I think even if we could just do a quick whistle-stop tour about some of the things that the Sikhs have had to deal with historically, whether it's the 1700s, whether you're talking about partition of India, which massively affected Sikh families, how many Sikhs lost their lives, how many had to leave India and / Pakistan because they didn't have a home anymore, because one was given to the Hindu people and one was given to the Muslim people, but Sikhs missed their own land, and then it all becomes very complicated. But again, that's kind of, in my opinion, what led to Sikhs spreading out so much across the world, is because it's almost like they don't have a sense of belonging, because when they fit in after 1947, obviously a little bit more controversial would be the 80s, 1984 and 1990s. But again, I know that was on Prevent once upon a time, so I'm not sure how much depth you can go into on that. However, it is a massive part of Sikh history. You would do very well to go into a Sikh family and find a family that has never discussed that. Because it's an important part of who we are. Yeah. So for me, just a whistle-stop tour, just to say, look, this is kind of the persecution that they faced. This is how they've ended up all over the world. And kind of this is where they're at the minute. And obviously, again, like that's a lot to cover. There's a lot of depth you can go into, but I think it's just that understanding of, the resilience, and that's where the pride comes from. We're a lot of pride in the Sikh community, but it comes from the fact that at one point there wouldn't have been a Sikh community. So yes, we are very proud. Yes, we do wear our turbans. Yes, we do stand very tall. And that all stems from the sacrifices that ancestors have made for hundreds of years.
And I think, as you're speaking, is it Guru Har Gobind who, with the coats with the 52 tassels, if you're a primary teacher, that's a really nice way into understanding a little bit of that history in a way that's kind of age appropriate, without maybe getting into too much of the sort of political side of things. But actually, if you're sort of secondary or higher, then actually some of that kind of difficult history is a really powerful thing to do alongside, the history they're taught in history can be a little bit biased towards, certain types of history. And so RE has this amazing opportunity to enhance their historical knowledge and understanding the history of Sikhs across the world, but particularly in this country as well. So our next little section is just about, it's a theme that's come up quite a lot, which is sort of equality in service and sort of the importance of that within the Sikh faith. How does that core belief or core practice or core value impact the life of a Sikh? So Amy, you've talked about this quite a lot, so let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I was thinking about this one and I was thinking, again, I think it's known, isn't it, that, one of the Sikh values is seva, which is, helping others. And then, of course, the oneness of, remembering sort of everyone's humanity before anything else. And that's part of the equality. And I guess it is connecting it with community. And I think community is something that is really big within Sikhi as well. And to be part of that community, of course, is to have responsibility, for yourself and for others, and to be able to sort of share any kind of wealth that you have with your community and with the community. Again, it's not defined as, just within the Sikh community. It's broader, of course, because again, that's looking at equality and looking at everyone as kind of part of the human race. So I think for me that's, that goes in hand in hand, sort of the belonging to a community, but also then equally having responsibility to be an active part of that community. Definitely something that I was born and brought up, not only being shown by my parents and sort of other family members, but also, being told to actively be a part. So, for example, when I was growing up, we would go to the Gurdwara, and, when I was old enough to be in the kitchen, to be helping out with preparing the langar or serving the langar or washing the dishes, it was never questioned. It was just something like we all have to come in and do. And that kind of, from a young age, I guess, gave me that real sense of service, of giving back. And then actually understanding the meaning behind, I think someone already mentioned it earlier, around behind the langar, about it very much being about equality. Everyone sits together and eats together. Everyone is served from the same pot of food, because no one is any different to anybody else. All of that, I think, is just exemplified in that one experience of not only eating the langar by sitting together, but also by being within that kind of community kitchen, and it being open to, everybody can come in and be part of that service, man, woman, everybody takes part in that whole thing from a young age. I think for me, that was it was never questioned. And it's that sense of belonging that you get from being within a community and having that kind of active role, I think, is really, really important. So I guess it's shown in a very practical way in that sense.
Also quite tangible. I think that a lot of our young people are in communities that are virtual, and there's nothing, I'm not dissing that at all, but actually it's quite nice to have that community that's very tangible, but also that real sense of purpose, because you're seeing the impact of an action that you're doing quite tangibly. I think that's interesting. Jatinder, how about you?
I think for me, it's a sort of like, I always see it as about how would I like to be treated? If I was, there and I was in a room with Amy, Kuljinder and Harry, that, how would I want to be treated? If I was feeling happy, how would they celebrate that with me? If I needed help, how would they help me? Whichever way you look at it, that, there is something there about, treating others how you would expect to be treated yourself, when you look at equality. And I think service then, that, through the faith, through our faith, we've got those opportunities that, that some other faiths might not have. Again, that concept of langar, it's the free kitchen, it's open to everyone. But then I also think as well, you said something, Louise, there about, the virtual world that we're living in. I'm part of a group of chaplains. For me, I'm part of that community, and I can celebrate being that, that even if I have to do something virtually, I'll do it. There's opportunities to help out with numerous charities, like I'm trying to get my youngest to use the summer holidays in a way that he can give back. And at Worcester Uni and at Worcester Library, they're looking for people to help, others read for 2 hours a week. So it's about giving back. Okay. And I think that the Sikh faith, it provides us with the principles, the fundamentals, and then it's about how you actually do it. how do you actually serve? And you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to do it in that sort of environment where there's 3,000 of you, through the concept of Lunga. Just that small act of helping somebody could have a massive impact, but you're using your belief, the concept of Sikhi, which is like that, that universal faith, the fact that we live in a global village, the fact that we're all one, regardless of what we believe in, we come the same way and we go the same way, but no one's actually come back and told us where you end up. So in that, those sort of three things are equal to all of us. So it is about that, that sense of community. There's different ways that you can celebrate that sense of community and practice my faith, that I can celebrate being a Sikh through that. There are challenges though, because some people will see it as sort of glorification of just something that that, and you see in the thing that, and you get it in all communities, all faiths as well. Someone will always try to be better than the other. So that, if someone's done a parade or someone's done a free kitchen or something, all of a sudden the guy down the road or in the next town's going to have to do something a bit bigger. And I think that's where we then lose that concept of equality and being humble, because something that I've been taught is that concept of being humble when we're carrying out these acts of service and do it without reward. So even though, that again, going back to the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, that they said, share what you have with others, but it's not about reward, it's about doing it selflessly. And again, thinking about if you needed help, if you needed support in any way, shape or form, how would you expect to be treated? And I think that's really important when it comes down to do that sort, that sense of community. Community can mean, so many different things in so many different settings, but it's about how do you want to be treated if you were in that space. And I think that's where not just Guru Nanak Dev Ji's teachings, but the whole of Guru Granth Sahib Ji provides us with those opportunities to just understand what is it that's happening in society. And I think sometimes we think about, okay, what directs us or what, sort of gives us the, the oomph, if you want to call it. And for me, it's thinking about, what's my teaching of the day? Something that, RE teachers will pick up on in class is the concept of hukam and the hukamnama, which is the edict from Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And, if I took an edict from Guru Granth Sahib Ji or I heard what was, read at the Gurdwara, how I then translate that, what that means for me might be different for what it means for Harry on that day, what it means for Kuljun, Renami and Louisa on that day. But we all take something from it because it guides us in that sense of, okay, I need to provide, help or support. I need to serve, in a way. So it gives you that direction. So that there is something there about it being individual, but there's opportunities to then come as a community in so many different ways.
Just for anyone who's listening who's not heard the word hukam before, do you want to just explain what that is?
Yeah, hukam is, if you look at the transliteration, it means command, so it means it's the command. And we live by hukam as Sikhs. That's what we're taught, that, we live by God's will. Whatever is happening is because of God's will. Something that Amy picked up, again, it's about celebrating the environment and the things that are around us. Things that are happening, it's because of God's will. So that's hukam. And then the good, bad, the ugly that happens in life, again, some people will say, oh, it's karma, but no, it's different to karma. It's hukam. It's that will. It's how it was meant to be. It's what's happening. And I think that's really important then, because that's the will. But then Guru Granth Sahib Ji is our living guru. They provide us with that nourishment. They provide us with that hukam, that direction that we need, whether it's, at moments of sadness, moments of happiness, just getting up in the morning and celebrating that, they provide us with that hukam every day. And like I said, the five of us in the room could be feeling very different or going through very different things, but we could all be given the same hukam, but it's how it's translated and how we then apply that to our situation or what we're dealing with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Jacinta's covered a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say then, to be fair. But I always, when I think of equality in service, I always think of the story that I was told as a kid about Baikan Yaji and how he was basically like a water carrier for Guru Gobind Singh Ji to give wounded soldiers water. There were complaints going to Guru Gobind Singh Ji about Baikan using the water. There wasn't a lot of it for the soldiers, but using it for Mughal soldiers as well. And he says to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he says, well, I didn't see a Sikh or a Mughal. I just saw a human being that needed. Guru Gobind Singh Ji said some things along the lines of, you've kind of understood the purpose of Sikhi is to not see that difference between. I think having that chance to serve people for a lot of Sikhs, it really drives them forward. And obviously, Bhai Kanhaiya, his story is very, very much an extreme example of that. But I consider kind of like how the idea of equality in service has pushed me in my life. And I would say actually before I became a teacher, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I felt like I didn't really have any purpose, but I wanted to make some sort of change, whether that's a small change or a big change, but for other people. I wanted to serve other people. So when I became a teacher, I felt like I really found that purpose. And yes, it's very basic. Oh, I'm teaching you English, I'm helping you get a GCSE, but it's more than that. It's supporting the kids on a pastoral level. It's helping guide them through mental issues that they might be having or physical issues that they might be having, and just being there for people, or for students, I should say. And I would say actually the fact that I feel like I found that purpose through service, and again, linking back to what Jatini said, it's a different service. It's not the same as going to the Gurdwara, Langar out. Yes, you can do that. I have done that. I do that. But this is a service that I'm providing on a daily basis in my mind. And that's my way of almost having that example, like living that, almost that story of Bhai Kanhaiya, but obviously not to that extreme. It's providing every student with whatever support I can, but that's in addition to the education that I provide as well. So yeah, it's all well good teaching them about Shakespeare and Dickens. That's not a problem. That's easy. It's about actually how do you turn them into an individual that wants to be part of the world, that doesn't want to be kind of sidelined by a certain, they want to follow this narrative today, so they're going to pretend that all people of a certain race are a certain way. It's kind of trying to break down those barriers. And I actually think the way the gurus have taught us is the way that we should see that, is there is no difference between, a brown person and a black person and a white person. We're all still humans at the end of the day. And I think having that chance, or having that as part of your core belief system, even aside from Sikhi, obviously from Sikhi it's really, really important, but even having that core belief aside from Sikhi actually just makes you a better person in general. To be providing a service or to be promoting equality, you just have to be a good person. You see, I've been pushed via my Sikhi, but it's definitely there for everyone to be able to do.
So as you're speaking, Harry, I'm thinking, the famous quote by Guru Nanak, there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, whose path shall I follow? I should follow God's path. That lives out in terms of don't label people, don't categorize, don't see who they are. It doesn't matter if they're black, white, male, female. If you're doing the right thing, if you are following God's path, don't discriminate against who you're going to use that to help.
So yeah, a lot of it has all been said, but I think equality in services, all the gurus taught equality and to help others, regardless of religion and caste. So it's a golden thread through all the gurus, and it's a golden teaching and a link to Jatinder Pal, treat others how you want to be treated. And as an RE teacher who has experienced racism, I always explain to my students, you're not born a racist. And I always say, we all bleed the same colour. And I say the same example Harry just gave, where Bhai Kanhaiya, he just sees the face of the guru in everybody. And that's how we should treat people. Like Amy said earlier, God is in everything. So that's how we should live, whether you're, like you said, not being labelled. You should start by being a good human being.
It doesn't feel like it's that difficult. If you look at the world and people are really struggling with this concept. So what's interesting is that actually, again, where we've got this connection between culture and religion, and defining, even though you're meant to see God in everybody and you're not meant to judge as a Sikh, how do people feel about interfaith marriages within Sikhi? Harry, let's start with you.
I think this is quite a controversial topic in the community, in my opinion, and one that actually I'm a little bit traditional with,
Yeah.
but in the sense of, I'm not trying to say that, oh, you're a Sikh, you have to get married to a Sikh. Like, you can marry whoever you want. That's the world we live in. That's not a problem. I think where the conversation becomes a little bit more controversial is when we discuss Anand Karaj, and that I think is almost understandable, because I think a lot of people don't understand the depth of what Anand Karaj is. So Anand Karaj, if anyone doesn't know, is the Sikh wedding ceremony. Within that wedding ceremony, you're devoting your life to the Guru. That's part of the ceremony. And I think on a human level, I'll take my own beliefs out of it. On a human level, I think it's quite disrespectful for you to say you're going to follow a teaching if it's something that you don't believe in yourself. I think that's where the discussion becomes a little bit like I said, controversial is because actually, if you're devoting your life to the Guru, then you do have to be a Sikh, in which case the conversation or the tagline of that would be, to have an Anand College, you must be a Sikh. And again, there's kind of ways around it. I've had this conversation many times with friends, with people at university, and it's not that you can't get married to someone who is not Sikh. It's just that if the person that you're getting married to doesn't believe in Sikh or isn't a Sikh, then you can't get married in a Gurdwara. And do as a way around it is you can have your normal registry marriage and then you can go to the Gurdwara and do a Sukhmani Sahib Path, and that is the same blessings, but you're not then devoting your life to Sikhi whilst deciding that you don't want to have anything to do with Sikhi. You're just doing it for the formality.
Yeah.
There has to be a conversation, especially with the younger generations, for them to understand the depth of an Anand College, because actually it is really deep and it is really important. It is very special. So to then just treat it like a bit of this is a photo opportunity, I find it myself quite disrespectful, because you're just doing it for the pictures.
So it's appropriating something that actually is really significant.
And that's with Sikhs as well. I'm not even saying that's non-Sikhs. That's Sikhs doing it themselves as well. And I think there definitely has to be some level of conversation or understanding, I would say, around the importance of an Anand College. Because again, it very much comes back to, if you're saying I can't have an Anand College, you're saying that, you can't get married outside of someone who's a Sikh. That's not what we're saying at all. We're just saying that understand what's going on, and sort of, if you do want to get married outside of Sikh, then you can. That's not a problem. But just kind of, you need to understand the depth of the actual ceremony that you're being part of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Kuljinder?
I've got the same idea. Is you can have civil interfaith marriages, but not the Anand College ceremony from the Guru Granth Sahib, because it's the focal point of the marriage ceremony. And as you're walking around it, certain hymns are sung, and it's to represent your life with your husband and with God. So when you're bowing down to the Guru Granth Sahib, you're accepting all the teachings. So some Gurdwaras do allow this ceremony, whereas others don't, and there's been protests outside Gurdwaras, because obviously people are against the fact they're having it in front of the Guru Granth Sahib.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Amy?
I guess I'm kind of seeing it a little bit different. I agree with what Harry was saying in terms of, understanding what what's being said when you're doing your Anand College, and I think that's the same for British born Sikhs as well, to understand the words, each time that you go around, the 4 times, what does it actually mean? Why are you bowing? All of that. I guess for me, because we've got interfaith marriages in my family where they've had the full Sikh ceremony, and then they've had the civil ceremony as well. I think it goes back to that understanding of what it is that the ceremony means and the words and things like that. But actually, I think it should be open to anybody that is willing to respect that that's their partner's faith. I feel that actually that's really, really important for that to be allowed to happen and to be open to that. I think just thinking, if I married a Sikh guy, but actually if I was ever told, if I met somebody who was non-Sikh and actually wanted to marry them, and I was told that, well, you can't get married in the Gurdwara, that would be quite hurtful, for me personally, because I wouldn't then see myself as being married. But I would also then equally expect my partner to understand what the ceremony is about, understand the religion and the faith as well. But that's part of them understanding me, So I guess I see it in, as being, I think it's really, really important for that to be the conversation, and for that to be the kind of the dialogue that takes place beforehand, and then for that to be, for then the marriage to be allowed and the ceremony to be able to take place within the Gurdwara with the Guru Granth Sahib.
And can 2 Sikh women get married, or 2 Sikh men get married?
I've heard of it happening. I've only seen on social media, but I don't think it's not particularly common from what I've heard. And I think actually the case that I was thinking about, it was because the Anand College can happen outside of a Gurdwara. It's wherever the Guru Granth Sahib is, and so actually I think where I've seen it happen, it wasn't within the Gurdwara, but it was the Sikh ceremony. But it's not something that that is common that I know of.
Yeah, interesting. Jatinder?
I think this is it's one of those topics for discussion that there's going to be different schools of thought and people coming at it from different angles. Just the concept of interfaith, just taking it a step back, that I've seen just in my own family, let alone interfaith, intercaste. Even though the fact that the Sikh faith did away with the caste system that was, that came out of the Indian subcontinent, intercaste marriages, have been frowned on, and they still are frowned on. If you're not marrying in the right caste, that's one thing. Interfaith, I think for me, it's really, really interesting because I think, again, I wouldn't say I'm a sort of a seed that got planted into the Sikh faith, but again, it was for me to understand that, if I wanted to talk to someone about what my faith was and what it meant, I needed to understand the core principles, where this was all coming from, before I could even start telling somebody that this is what they might want to think about doing, or this is what they could do. And I think it's really important, and I think Harry picked up on it as well. I think everybody has. But for me, if you think about it in terms of how relationships are formed, it's the only relationship that's formed in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. When you're looking at other relationships, friendships, relationship between mother and child, father and child, brother and sister, none of those relationships are formed in the same way. So this is the only union or the only relationship that's formed in a specific way. And sometimes I think as well, when we talk about interfaith, and the concept of Anandakar is going back to what Harry said as well. If we didn't think that there needed to be a way of confirming or affirming how a couple should live their life, then Guru Ramdas, you wouldn't have blessed us with those 4 lava, those 4 verses, which, are read to conclude, the Anandakar itself. And I think it's really important because, again, going back to what Harry said as well, and, I'm in this category too, that how many of us actually have gone back to read Guru Granth Sahib Ji, in the sense that, read those 4 verses again to see how they apply in our day-to-day matrimonial life. Do they bear any significance in how we carry out our relationship as husband and wife? But the same going back to the hukam as well, that how many of us actually read or listen back to the hukam that was given to us as a couple? And I think that's where it becomes really difficult then, because I think for me, going back to what Harry said as well, Sikhs fall into the same camp here. How many of us are there just to have that photo opportunity to have the big fat Indian wedding, like I said, which is different then to the concept of a Sikh wedding? It's really, really difficult because, going back to the point that, if someone said to me, but my partner understands, what the Sikh faith's about, they're willing to embrace it and letting me carry on practicing my faith, I think that's fine as a thought, as an idea. But then are you really buying into that? Like I said, how the relationship's formed. It's the only relationship that's formed in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Otherwise, it is to me. And it's sad to say, because I probably fell into that camp as well at some point in life, that, it was a photo opportunity, that, did I really understand what was happening 22 years ago when I got married, that, that did I understand what these 4 verses actually meant? Did I understand the hukam at the end of the ceremony? And I'm actually applying that in my life now, when my other half and, we might have a ding dong. Do we go back and think, okay, are we doing things in how things should have been done? And I think if you're not part of the Sikh faith, it becomes you're a bit more removed than, aren't you, in terms of trying to understand how you then apply that and understand that. And I think that's where you get that conflict, because you've got 2 schools of thought then trying to sort of resolve whether it's an issue or something. But it's really, really interesting, because you could go back to the 50s and 60s and thinking again about what Harry said about how the Sikh community has sort of at one point was completely wiped out, but then how through sort of, traveling across borders, Sikhs have then survived. And, you look at families that have sort of moved across, and they will have married people from different communities, but then the Sikh community has survived. I know people in Tibet, Nepal, Singapore that have married national Singaporeans, if that's what they're called, or Nepalese people, and that's how their families have then carried on. The same with when you look at, again, what was happening with Punjabi families moving over to Kenya. A lot of men actually married African women, and it's just that concept. But even in the UK, I could rewind probably 30 years, probably a bit more than, don't want to give my age away, I'm still 21. But yeah, that you can still, it was never frowned upon. And I think this is where it's one of those things that how we've evolved as a community is very, very different. Like I said, probably 30 years ago, 35 years ago, if there was a white man marrying a Punjabi girl, or a Punjabi man marrying a white girl, at the Gurdwara, probably no one even flinched. Everyone just went along with it. And it was like, yeah, job's done. Thank you very much. Off you go. Live your life. I think one thing that's made a difference now is that people have become interested. And that's because of things like tech. You've got things that are actually there in front of you. There's the opportunity to ask questions. And it goes back to culture and community as well. I ask my mum sometimes that, okay, why didn't you ever ask the question? She went, oh, it was just never the thing that we did as girls in the family. We never challenged what our dad said or what the elders said. Whereas now, you know, my sister, my cousins, that we'd probably have an open conversation and try and understand what's actually going on. But like I said, there's more at our hand. You know, we've got more to hand. You know, technology has played a massive part in trying to sort of understand what our faith means. And because of that, you know, I won't call them the leaders, because leaders to me means something very, very different. But those that are in position of authority, they've then now taken the opportunity to say, okay, we need to make it really, really quite clear that if someone is going to get married, it has to be a union between a Sikh man and a Sikh woman. Some people have taken it further, that the concept of Nandkaraj is only between two initiated Sikhs as well. So again, there's that concept of, we call it the Ret Maryada, that came about in the 1900s. I can't even remember what year it was. But something was, Ret Maryada means, the way of life, how you live your life. And it sets out how things are done. And it talks about the different ceremonies. So the naming ceremony, death, marriage. And in there, it talks about this, about a Sikh. And there's still discussion about, does that label then, is it a Sikh in the sense of a baptized Sikh or someone that's just born into a Sikh family? So again, there's still so much discussion out there. But I always say that, if someone wants to do something or twist something to their advantage, they'll do it, they'll find a way. But at the same sense, that's not them being true to the key concepts of what's there.
And actually, what all of you have kind of said, that actually it's the meaning of the words that you're saying and the promises that you're making to each other that's significant. And actually, somebody could be born into a Sikh family, go through the marriage ceremony,
for the photo opportunity,
and not mean it. Someone who's not a Sikh can actually study those words and actually decide that they want to embody them. And so you've kind of got this sort of complex situation. But I think really what the overall meaning is if, the ideal is if you have an Ankaraj, that you try and make it authentic rather than a photo op, whatever your background is, whatever your path is, that just try and make those words significant to you and don't appropriate them or use them.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, that it's the only relationship that, in our faith that's actually formalized, codified, established in front of Guru Granth Sahib.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
something that, that can't be, it's not something that's just like I said, a photo opportunity or an opportunity just to get your friends together and family together. Have a quick knees up. It's something very, very significant.
Yeah, 100%. Just as we close, and it's just been so fascinating, I feel we've got on this really beautiful journey and covered lots of really wonderful things that is going to really enhance people's teaching of Sikhi. There are differences among you. There's gender differences, there's expression differences, there's belief differences. But what do you think it is that unites you all? Kuljinder?
So what unites us all is obviously believing in the oneness of God, the idea of seva, serving others and sharing with others, and the idea of treating everybody equally. So I think we've all talked about that at some point, and it links back to, like, as an RE teacher, when I first do start a Sikhi lesson, I do look at the Guru Nanak's teachings of Nam Japna, repeating God's name or remembering his name, Keert Karni, honest living, and Vand Shakna, which is sharing with others. So I feel like that is the core. Sometimes they call them the 3 pillars of Sikhi, but the core beliefs in Sikhi. But along with that is equality and selfless service as well.
Thank you so much. Amy?
Yeah, I think just to agree with Kuljinder, I think it's all of those key concepts and key values. I think that's come through everything that all 4 of us have been saying, actually, again and again. And it's been lovely to hear, because I feel like I'm really, again, connecting, with everybody and through all of those things. But that's part of that sense of community, I think, that I feel when I do meet with others of the Sikh faith and people that I've never met before. But, as soon as you find out that they're Sikh, or you see that they're Sikh, it's like, there feels like that instant connection, because at the core, it's the shared values.
Thank you. Jatinder?
Yeah, I think for me, again, we're so different, the 4 of us. in so many different ways, shapes and forms. One thing that I think that unites is the fact that we've always had a good meal whenever we've gone to the Gurdwara. If you're feeling a bit peckish, you know that you're going to sit down and get fed properly. And you can eat the stuff that, your mom and dad would probably tell you shouldn't be eating. But even them, like the diabetics out there, they're probably like, it's longer, we can eat it, it's fine. But no, I think for me, on a serious note, I think what unites us is the fact that it's not just the core principles and how we practice that faith. I think for me, like the highest authority for a Sikh is Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And I think the four of us don't see Guru Granth Sahib Ji as a book. It's not something that's on a shelf. It's there as our living guru. It's our guide day to day. And how I bow down to Guru Granth Sahib Ji is the same way that Harry does it, the same way Kuljinder and Amy do it. We don't do it in different ways. I don't have my leg hanging one way or my head through the back door and, Harry on ground floor, because he cuts his beard, and Jatinder's on the top floor because he's carrying the 5Ks. No, I think for me, what unites us is that we see Guru Granth Sahib Ji as our eternal Guru, our guide, and going back to that hukum that the four of us will take, not just guidance, but we will take comfort from that guidance as well. It provides that comfort blanket in many, many ways. The teachings of the Guru Granth, of all gurus and Guru Granth Sahib, they provide that comfort blanket and that reassurance that everything is going to be fine. And I think that's where that resilience comes back into what Harry was saying before. I think the teachings provide us with that thing that unites us, which is that, I think, who was it? I can't remember who said it, but everything's going to be all right on the night. And it is.
Jatinder, we're clearly the same age.
Yeah.
We'll be all right on the night. Yeah. Harry?
We all have that very strong belief. We all, have that we're going to follow God's hukum. Whatever's going to happen, that is in God's hands, effectively. We're just here, effectively,
Mhm.
as long as we're following those three pillars, and an honest living, remember God's name, giving to charity where you can. I think that's where we're at. And I would also say, to be fair, that the journey, obviously to be a Sikh is to be a student. You're always learning. There's no such thing as, knowing everything. That's just not a thing. We're all on our own journey, but also we're all coming from different angles and dealing with different things. But along the journey, a lot of us have gone through the same thing. We've looked at the idea of identity, and actually, do we fit into that Sikh identity or that Punjabi identity or that British identity or whatever it is? And I feel like a lot of Sikhs all around the world, they will have that battle. But again, the one thing that unites us is that same belief in Guru Granth Sahib, in hukum, in what our gurus have taught us. And I think as long as those beliefs are at the core of your heart, it doesn't really matter what you look like. It doesn't matter whether you manage to have the full 5Ks or not. I think, and I'm not saying that, obviously there will be people who will disagree with me and say, effectively the end goal is to become a baptized Sikh. And that is my personal end goal. But that's not going to be everybody's. And I think we have to be understanding and just say everyone's on their journey. As long as they're showing that respect and that understanding, and we are living out those values, it doesn't matter where we come from, whether it's Canada, England, India, we all want the same thing effectively, and that is just to live in a nice, peaceful society with a good community around us.
With that nicely leads on to my last question then. Like, if you could wake up tomorrow and one thing was different about the world, what would you want it to be?
A tough one. There's so many things. Like, obviously the basic answer would be, more equality, people showing more love for each other, less hatred in the world. I think that's one thing that I really struggle with seeing, is just hatred which is completely unfounded. Hatred which makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, you just have to spend 10 minutes watching the news and you'll see it all. And a lot of it is just, again, lack of education. A lot of the arguments don't even make sense. So for me, it would be for everyone to be a little bit more open-minded and, try and show love rather than dividing by people and using hatred to kind of send people away to different areas and segregate each other.
Yeah, thank you. Amy?
That was going to be my answer too. It is along the same lines, basically. I think, especially with everything that's going on in the world currently, and it just feels like it's kind of getting more difficult. That I think if we could go back to that core concept of, seeing humanity in everybody, and that, recognizing us all as equal, as human beings, and not doing all the othering and the kind of the hatred and, the the division that we're seeing and the rhetoric that is dividing people. I think that would be that would be my one wish.
Yeah, thank you. Jatinder?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's, again, going back to what Harry said before, the fact that we're all on a journey. And I think if my journey was different, I think it goes back to courage. I wish I had the courage. If I could wake up tomorrow, I think it'd be one thing that would be different if I had more courage. And I think it's, again, thinking about, the resilience of our ancestors, the Sikh gurus, that they had, and the fact that I feel like I didn't have that in me to be courageous and to stand up, to fight the oppression. It's different oppression, but I was bullied for my hair. I cut it. Sometimes it touches a nerve, and it's a raw nerve even now. But I think, I just wish I had the courage. But I think it's courage both ways. Then that going back to what Amy and Harry have said as well, that just finding that time to respect and love others. That you need courage to do that as well. You need to have that courage to want to learn and understand other people. And at the same time, then, for those individuals to have the courage to live how they want to live. I wanted to live as a kid with long hair. My life might have been quite different, but hey ho, that was hookup. Again, going back to God's world, that was what was planned for me. And I think it sounds a little bit like Wizard of Oz, doesn't it? That the Tin Man, what did he want? He wanted a heart.
Yeah.
The lion wanted courage. So I think there's something there. And I think the analogies that I think films like The Wizard of Oz give us, you could watch them and you could put Dorothy in any sort of faith setting.
Yeah.
And her friends would be all of those things that we all need. We all need a little bit of love. We all need a little bit of courage. We all need a bit of a heart, so there's those things. I can't remember the rest, but yeah, let's all be something from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah. Kuljinder?
I just would like to see, I know we do have it, but a more compassionate and tolerant society where everyone just treats everybody with dignity and kindness, no matter who they are.
Do you know what? Well, I just think most people that I meet are this thing that you're trying to create. That's the world that you want to see. And it's a shame that it's not, those are the ones that are not in the media and in the press. But I think, the vast majority of human beings are compassionate and wise and humble and loving. So, and I've said this before, like for me, it's just how I treat the person tomorrow is how I create that world that we're describing. So guys, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and authentic and open and honest about, your faith and your strengths and your weaknesses and the tough times and the joy that it brings you. But we really, really appreciate it. And, I really hope people listening just feel a bit more connected to the Sikh faith and can teach it in a way that kind of authentically represents you. So thank
Louisa,
you so much.
Can I just, I've just looked up today's Hukminama. Can I just share it with everyone?
Yes.
So it says the Hukminama highlights that true wealth and peace reside within, which the true Guru helps reveal, removing ego and fostering constant meditation on the divine name. By focusing on the Lord, one attains greatness and perceives the Creator everywhere. So it's like a saying every day. So if you go to the Gurdwara, you'll see the Hukminama. So we're all going to now interpret this a different way, but at the same time, the key concept is oneness of God. That's what I picked up from that.
Thank you. And Kuljinder, I believe you know the meaning of Harry's name.
I've got a surprise for you, Harry. So we're breaking your name down. We have Har, which comes from or Hari, God. We've got Man, which means mind or heart. And then Vinder or Inder comes from king or of gods. So technically your name is God of Heaven, brave warrior of God, and one with the divine supreme mind.
Right,
so you are also a superhero.
We'll throw Harry in the bin then, shall we? That's beautiful. Thank you. You just made my evening. That's lovely. My original name was actually meant to be Harmander, and I think that's why Mum was a bit vexed.
We've unleashed a superhero into the world. How beautiful. What a lovely way to end the episode. Thank you, Kuljinder. My name is Louisa Jane Smith, and this has been the RE Podcast, the podcast for those of you who think RE is boring, but it's not. It's where we celebrate unity among diversity, explore lived experiences of real people, and break down the misconceptions that divide us. But thank you so much for letting me bore the life out of you.